That last journey was very profound. I'm grateful that you took the time to listen. This is the next part, the second direction. To begin, I'd like to share some of the ways that I feel this interconnects with a lot of the teachings and traditions that I've received prior to meeting with Hopi elders, but also their prophecies. And so again, 2012 was not about the end. It was not about the end of the world. It was about the end of a grand cycle and the beginning of a new one. Cycles of time, continuous cycles. So we've basically gone through, since the end of 2012, what they call the 9 cycles, or the nine hells, or the 9 Shibalwas. And Shibalwa is known as the underworld to the Maya. Ultimately, that's the time for purification. That's the time for all of these old ways and systems and old belief systems to dissolve and fall away. Whatever doesn't serve us. These changes come from within, on Earth, within our universe. These are teachings and messages that have come down through millennia from our ancestors and elders, through our traditions, stories, and messages. So this is about listening. It's about preparing. It's about taking action and dissolving fear. So ever since I was a child, I had these visions and this calling, and the Hopi message and the Hopi calling was like a full culmination and coming together of all the things that I've experienced, the visions, the messages, and so forth throughout my life, my work with elders and different teachers. It's really quite profound how it's all interconnected through this message. So these prophecies and messages have been guarded and kept by these nations, specifically by the Hopi. And they come with prophecies, messages, and warnings. And they provide you with a choice. We always have a choice. The choice is, what do you want? It's based on ifs or maybes, so they don't make finite statements about how things are going to be. Could be this way or it could be that way. You decide. You choose the fork in the road, which way you want to go. The zigzag way to nowhere, or the path to balance and harmony. That's your choice. The Hopi have been instructed after the last sign to go back underground and to preserve a lot of their ceremonies. And a lot of their ceremonial practices are done in kivas, which are underground, and they're only strictly shared with Hopi. No outsiders. They're very strongly protected. So they've gone underground to prepare. Underground could be symbolic, as I said, to either literally being underground in the kivas, or being underground as in keeping a low profile, unseen, quiet amongst themselves. The Hopi believe that they were the first people, and that they made this covenant with Creator to be people of peace, or the keepers of earth. The Hopi call this the road plan, or the pattern of life, which is illustrated through Prophecy Rock, which I've explained, having the 2 paths, the 2 directions, with the choice, which I'll explain further. And in 1901, the mesas of the Hopi Nation split. Oribe and Hotevilla were formed. Hotevilla is known as Third Mesa. Oribe is known as First Mesa. And the nation was split into what they called modern Hopi and traditional Hopi. Ukiuma, who was Grandfather Martin's uncle, was a traditionalist who led those who wanted to remain traditional to Hotevilla to form their own shrine and protect their traditions by living traditionally. Much of Hotevilla still has no running water, no electricity, no cable, no hydro lines, none of that modern stuff. This is where the Hopi traditions, the roots of the Hopi traditions of the traditionalists, has been kept and protected. This is where Grandfather Martin lived, and this is where I visited. Another thing that Grandfather Martin shared with me, which I'll go further into during these messages, is that Agartha exists, that there is a world in the center of the earth, and that the beings are superhuman. And the Hopi believe that they came from the center of the earth, through the Grand Canyon, Chaco Canyon, in that area, through a reed of bamboo, and that they gave their commitment to Masao to come here and be the keepers of earth. So I just want to share prophecies specifically that were shared. You'll see how they relate to and describe what's happening now in present day. It's quite profound. There are prophecies of purifications through volcanoes, fires. That was the first one. The second one, the second world, was through ice, Then the third world was through flooding, and we're presently in the fourth, transitioning into the fifth. So according to Hopi tradition and many indigenous teachings from Turtle Island, our four worlds have consisted of water, rock, plant, and animal. So now we're in the fifth world, which is the era of the human, the merging of consciousness, or as I said before, man. So God being, showing our infinite potentiality by being divine human, a divine being, or superhuman, as Grandfather Martin would call it. This splitting of the tribes in 1901 was essentially the transformation of Native people. See, the Hopi, first of all, they believe that anything that happens in Hopi land is a microcosm of what happens around the world. So it's the micro of the macro. They say that this was a transformation of Native people, including Hopi, to Bahana, or white man's ways. The people of peace would essentially shift to people of destruction. They also have messages and prophecies that speak of people that will come from other races and live among the Hopi and erect their own kingdom among Hopis and pose as good-hearted. Their words will be charming and they will multiply like ants. So these are the 9 signs, Hopi prophecy. The first sign, we are told of the coming of the white-skinned men like Bahana, not living like Bahana, men who took the lands that were not theirs, and men who struck the enemies with thunder. This is the second sign. Our lands will see the coming of the spinning wheels of wood filled with voices. In my youth, my father saw this prophecy coming true with his eyes, the white men bringing their families in wagons across the prairies. This is the third sign. A strange beast, like a buffalo, but with great horns, will overrun the land in great numbers. These Whitefeather saw with his own eyes the coming of the white men's cattle. This is the fourth sign. The land will be crisscrossed by snakes of iron. This is the fifth sign. The land will be crisscrossed by a giant spider's web. This is the sixth sign. The land will be crisscrossed with rivers of stone that make pictures in the sun. This is the seventh sign. You will hear of the sea turning black and many living creatures dying because of it. This is the eighth sign. You will see many youth who wear their hair long, like my people, come and join the tribal nations to learn their ways and wisdom. And this is the ninth and last sign. You will hear of a dwelling place in the heavens, above the earth, that shall fall with a great crash. It will appear as a blue star. Very soon after this, the ceremonies of our people will cease. To give more specific reference to some of these other terms, the House of Mica, or the House of Glass, is the UN, or the United Nations, which they made 4 attempts to share the teachings. And they said that if those 4 attempts failed, ultimately throw the messages into the setting sun to the west. They speak of racial superiority and the need to conquer and convert, which is very reflective of our residential schools and what a lot of indigenous native nations incurred through the church. They say that knowledge and teachings which does not stand the test of science or scientific thought would be discredited. They speak of roads in the skies, our current issue with chemtrails or geoengineering. Hopi speak of moving houses of iron, trains, horseless carriages, cars, the ability to speak through cobwebs, phones, speaking through space, internet, cell phones, men's clothing being taken over by women. The sacred body of women will be devalued. People will struggle for power to rule over others. Each race will form different systems once their leaders become distorted by mistakes and destructive ways. Hotevilla and Hopi will be spared if they choose to follow the road plan. Prophecy Rock illustrates the road plan. It was carved by lightning, just as the tablets that Moses carried, in perfection, all along this stone that show the root teaching, showing the path to nowhere, showing the path to balance. It was created there by lightning, by Masao, creator. Short hair, bald head, new generation Hopi would rule Hopi people under the influence of Pahana. This refers to the Hopi Tribal Council, which was not voted on, or the Hopi government by traditional elders. People with the cross would appear with good hearts, but will aim at destroying Hopi culture. Goes without saying that that's clearly the church and religion. Vines will extend in all directions, causing sudden changes throughout the continent. Changing of ceremonial practices is about losing their connection with nature. Bahana or white schools will destroy the Hopi pattern of life. This is also known as assimilation. This information is to be shared and will come forth when we are overcome by harmful elements and can step no further. Pahana, white brother, is to return the tablets to their rightful keepers. Hopi will forget their language. Time will come when material laws will come before great spirit laws. Simply one truly righteous traditional person can fulfill Creator's mission. Governments will cease to care about native peoples. Time will seem to be moving faster. The great purification will come. Words of the wise will be ignored from the elders. Halos will appear around the sun and moon. The earth will warm, returning us to an ice age. There will be wars against terrorism and religion. There will be changes to our climate. We will exceed our resources. There will be fuel shortages and crisis in energy, fuel scarcity, drought, starvation, food shortages. Tropical lands will become ice. Arctic will become tropical. The magnetic poles will shift. We will be caught in a mystic fog, otherwise known as a false spirituality. This next part is a recollection of my journey the second time to Hopi land, which I call the Return Path Recall. And it goes more into my work with Grandfather Martin and the revealing of the prophecies and so on, and how they relate to everything else, how everything is interconnected essentially. I left in synchronicity with the full moon as always, on the last wave of the Zolkin galactic count, symbolizing the end of time or his story. I came with the intention to deliver the rains, fulfilling my archetype as a rainmaker. I felt the Hopi cries for water, nurturance, abundance, and purification. As I was traveling on the train, the first night of the full moon, Gregorian September 5th, the moon rose in all her magnificence, glowing a deep red, symbolizing the red moon of purification. After arriving in Hotevilla, I understood from the locals that the rains came with great force. A big storm the previous night, and again that evening, after arriving, another storm rolled in. For the following 2 days, clouds and sprinkles of rain were abundantly flowing. It felt good. The Kachinas were helping us. After talking with several Hopi, it was shared that though it's always a blessing when the rains come, it's too late to aid in restoring or reaping any crops that year. Everything is dead, dry as a bone, yellow, 1.5 feet off the ground. Any rains that do come now are just washing away the fragile plants that struggle for survival, Grandfather Martin mentioned. The Hopi are facing starvation this winter and next spring, summer due to their crops dying, this year due to extreme drought and heat. Plants, fruits, and vegetables are dead. They're dry. I witnessed it firsthand as I walked up through the family crops, fields, and gardens belonging to Martin and Dennis, and listened to various reflections of desperation and despair from others. Grandfather Martin said, "This is the first time in our history when we've been completely losing our crops and face the beginning of starvation. Soon people, including progressive Hopi, will learn that the message of Masao in Arabi, reminding us to live simply with the earth and respect her, not to pollute the atmosphere and the lands, to resist technology. Soon we will learn that we cannot eat the money, that money that will become worthless." He then went on to reflect, "This is a sign that the great purification is here. Hopi lands are an example of life on earth, and when Hopi are facing starvation due to drought and famine, it's our final signal that the purification has begun, and it's not sparing us Hopi. Now the earth will turn over 4 times. Martin faced me with fear in his eyes and worry in his heart, feeling almost convinced things are about to get very rough for Hopi and starvation is imminent. I told him that I am by their side, that I made a covenant with Creator to be in service and to stand by them as a white brother, that I would not allow that to happen to the best of my ability. Everything is dead in way of crops or food. The Hopi have grown their own crops since the dawn of their culture, and with the current situation face either driving or hitchhiking to Tuba City, which is 80 miles each way, to buy food from American supermarkets and eating typical processed packaged food, or not eat at all. The other important factor is money to buy the food. Secondly, they are not prepared for this economical flux of extra expenses, i.e. buying all their food for a year and paying for gas to get there and back. Plus, many elders do not have this option in any way. However you view it, due to their frail bodies and not having the strength to travel, I am launching a personal crusade to create a food drive, which will hopefully allow me to drive a substantial amount of food out to the Hopi Reserve and make a donation of abundance to their community. Even if next year's weather is good and crops are abundant, they will not have their own food supplies until this time next year after harvest. And their water supply has now diminished to one spring in the entire community which exists in Hotevilla. As promised by Masao, Hotevilla would be protected. Grandfather Martin expressed and reminded me, how we react and respond to this crisis and urgency will be a micro-reflection on how we begin to deal with these types of issues during challenging times across the earth. Then this also reminded me, as Gandhi suggested, be the change you want to see in the world. It's never too late to make that shift and be that change. I pray for help, praying for abundance for all, to all my relations. When prayer and meditation are used, rather than relying on a new invention to create more imbalance, they will also find the true path. Mother Nature tells us, which is this right way. The day I arrived, it also happened to be the 1,000-year anniversary of Hotevilla, founded by Grandfather Martin's uncle, Yakyuma. He led the elders to another mesa with strong intention to uphold and practice traditional ways, as other areas of Hopi land, including Oraibi, were becoming progressive and deeply influenced by Bahana's ways, which was foretold to be the falling of their culture. Second night of the full moon, as we were standing and camping on Den of Heaven's land with Susie's blessings, the moon danced for over 20 minutes in an elliptical orbit, and erratically from side to side bounced up and down. I had a friend who was present with me, and we were both deeply amazed and in deep gratitude for experiencing something so uniquely magical. We cleared our eyes, looked in different directions, and still experienced and witnessed the same motions. It felt like the moon was communicating or somehow illustrating how we perceive the earth to shake. It also felt it was perhaps Chief Dan treating us to a psychedelic surreal light show as we were camping only a few hundred meters from his resting ground. The next day, after further sharing with Martin, he revealed that there is a line missing from Prophecy Rock. Granddad told me 2 weeks ago the line was present on the petroglyph at Prophecy Rock, but now it has disappeared. It vanished. After verifying it myself by going there, I asked if he felt it was actually a destiny. Like an oracle we have chosen, because the line which has vanished is the line connecting us to the red road after straying. It represents our final chance to sustain balance rather than experience the great purification or the path leading to nowhere. I reflected to him part of the reason I returned during this particular visit was to bring the rains, to come and listen, be of service as always, but to also hold space and ceremony to call forth the purification. We again reflected on the state of the crops and the water, possibilities of facing starvation, and how these were the last signals Masao gave. With a specific direction, he told me to go out on the mesa and pray. Pray for the earth to heal. Pray for all the hearts to be clean. Pray that we are all purified. And so I did. The Hopi are losing our culture. They are in conflict with each other and themselves, as all humans must face. That week, staggering results from polar ice caps melting was released, reflecting the same extreme rate of melt that could be led to no Arctic ice by the end of this era. The Hopi elders are passing quickly, very quickly, as communicated by Susie. We are afraid our traditions will be lost. The youth are not interested in traditional ways. They want to indulge in Bahana practice. They show no interest in learning or participating in events and ceremonies. We need our youth, some of them, someone, to really step in a position and carry these teachings for future generations. Yet, as in other Native communities, I've heard the same, but from the youth perspective. In relation to Tibet, it is directly below Hopi land. Ironically, their languages are opposite to each other, yet their traditions are like a mirror. They suffer together, wishing to be left to their traditional values and ways without outside influences and progression. They believe that a simple, humble life, working in harmony with earth and the elements, is all we need to create paradise. Yet, as most native nations on earth, they are intruded upon by religion, world governments and corporations, thus indoctrinated, incarcerated, murdered, and in some ways forced to conform to Western ways or face starvation, poverty, or even death. Martin forewarned me, when the earth turns over 4 times and the purification really begins to take form, the safest place is to be in the Four Corners regions, which represents Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. However, Arizona at this time was the only pure place within the Four Corners, meaning that it did not have any nuclear facilities or war weapons. After contemplating Martin's response to the Hopi preparing for the Great Purification, I referred to the Middle Earth map of Agartha that he initially presented. This is where the Hopi came from, and this is where we're going to prepare for this purification. Just so happens that spring, plans were underway in the North Pole by a Russian team expedition to explore the hollow Earth at coordinates 84.4 degrees north latitude, 141 east longitude. Ultimately, Hopi believe that we are entering into the world of the fifth sun, but the purification is necessary and chosen process, which we will all experience. Those that will survive and move onward are those with a clean heart, a good heart. I spent 2 days working in the blazing hot Arizona sun, planting over 2 acres of food with Elder Dennis by hand, the traditional Hopi way. The prayers for rain and water last year worked. The earth there is nice and it's moist with water. We created the holes, planted the seeds, and did prayers for every plant. It was very magical to learn their traditional way of gardening. That's the basic thing. I really activated Martin and Dennis. They are very inspired and interested now. They understand and remember the principles of natural time, the cycles and energies, and how these codes actually work. The Hopi are losing hope. They're giving up, said Martin. After 4 missions to the UN and several sharings with hundreds of people, along with the so-called disinterest of the youth, Grandfather Martin claims it's coming to an end. Nobody is listening. They don't care, he said. So I reminded Grandfather Martin, remember I said to you I was going to find the Dalai Lama and ask him to come and meet with you about closing the cycle and the coming purification? I wrote many emails from my heart. They were received and screened by his administration, and they said he was too busy, but I won't give up. I know it's important for you to share again. And again, Martin implied, it's now too late. We are in it. The time of great purification, and there's no way to avoid it. These things are getting onward. I continued to go deeper with Grandfather Martin. We shared our Tibetan tankas. He has one hanging of Chod, and I showed him mine of Vajrasattva. I told him about my Vajra appearing mysteriously on my altar, how lamas cannot explain where it came from. I also shared my dream with him about going to Tibet. I had a dream that I was on a mountain in Lhasa and was climbing this mountain, and my Hopi elders were at the bottom and they sent me off. As I was climbing up the mountain, I saw this goddess who is later revealed to me as the goddess of compassion. And this woman who led me up the mountain continued to coerce me not to give up and to keep climbing and to follow her. And as I followed her, we came up to the summit of the mountain and there was a little shack there. And she disappeared around the corner of the shack. And as I came around the corner of the shack and peered into the window, she was gone. And I saw a lama sitting there meditating. And it was the Karmapa. And he waved me in. He said, come in, come in. And so I went inside and he asked me to sit down. And as I sat down, put my head down to listen. And as I put my head down, the Lama says to me, oh, you got our message. You received your tool. You received the Vajra. And I said, yes, I have. So I showed him the Vajra. I said, yes, I received this Vajra. It appeared on my altar. And as I looked up, the Lama took the Vajra from my house. He pressed it against my third eye and he smiled. And he said, thank you for listening. Welcome. And his face transformed into the Dalai Lama. And at that point, I said to him, we're waiting for you to come back to Hopi land. The elders need to talk to you. It's time. And my dream ended. Grandfather Martin and I began to talk about the tablets, the sacred tablets that are mentioned in their prophecies. There are 5 in total. He is the guardian of 2, his clan, his family. He only has 1, or had 1. The other still needs to be returned, which was the fire tablet. This is the one that Pahana was supposed to return and find. And we then discussed where it was. I explained to him that I was feeling intuitively that it was somewhere close to him, close to Hotevilla, not outside of Hopi lands. And apparently it is. It is somewhere near the original mesa of Oribe, I said. I've seen it in my visions. I then began to explain that I had brought all the symbols and signals that he was waiting for. The swastikas, which are the destiny castles of time, a cosmic egg, which was a wooden ball carved with two dragons, which represented the two water serpents in their prophecies. And there was a crystal in the inside of the ball, so I gave them that. And then another is that I would be representing the color red, or the red road, which connected the Red Nation to part of my native heritage and also Tibetan people. We then reflected on a ceremony last year when we buried the water in his garden. I brought some water from the mountains of British Columbia and then also from Shasta to Hopi land. He explained to me that you never bring water from the ocean. You always bring fresh water, because when you bring water from the ocean and salt water, it will cause more drought. So always bring fresh water down the tree of life to the desert. So we buried this water that I brought to him, being a water carrier, and we did a ceremony in his garden with that water the previous year. So while I was reflecting on that ceremony from the previous year, we then went on to reflect on how it's perfectly synchronistic that this year is the magnetic moon, and that the moon itself represents purification and water. And that really hit him deep. He felt that that was super clear, and he became emotional. Again, we discussed and explained that all common things between Maya, Tibetan, and Hopi, and now he started to really feel it. The pieces were falling together, revealing the interconnectedness of the three traditions and cultures between these three nations. So I again explained that part of my intention is to combine what he is teaching and sharing with natural time, Tibetan teachings and consciousness, and how the combination of the three, a whole systems message or teaching, complete. And he agreed with me. To assure Grandfather Martin of my intentions and integrity, I told him that he could trust me 100%, and he grabbed my hands. He held my hands strongly. Then he went into his room and came back out with 2 replica tablets belonging to Chief White Bear, who has already passed. He set them in front of me as a test and asked me what they meant. What are these symbols for? I explained all of the symbols to him. One side has an image of a human, footprints, and a snake wrapped all the way around the image, beginning from his tail, ending at his mouth. Quetzalcoatl, I explained. This is Quetzalcoatl, the end of time, the end of the cycle, rebirth. And then I told him how Pahana and Quetzalcoatl are the same path. I then claimed, this is the symbol of the return path, the ending and the beginning. He said, you're right. Yes. I also knew somehow what the missing corner of the tablet looked like, what part of the image was missing. The elders are always fighting it, condemning Martin and Susie, doing their best to try and stop this information from being released. However, the information is kept by the Hopi Nation. It's not owned. This information, which belongs to humanity, and Susie and Martin know this, which is why they share it. This is what is believed by only the traditionalists. And then I asked, are you the only traditional elder alive? He said, yes. I questioned, so I'm receiving the teachings and direction right from the purest source? And Martin responded, yes, that comes with a huge responsibility. I am receiving these teachings and showing a real determination to share it with the world as instructed by Martin on every occasion. As he acknowledges that, it makes him a bit concerned because, as he suggested, it's a huge mission. But I told him I can be trusted and that I am going to do it 100%. It's a lot of work and takes deep dedication, brothers. Nothing we can do little by little. It's 100% or nothing. He now also knows how close we are to the end of the cycle because of the destiny castles, the Zolkin, their traditional stories and prophecy signs, including other information I showed him. He was only watching the signals for changes. These things are getting onward. We must prepare ourselves, he said. Martin again explained that Arizona is the only safe place in the U.S., more so Hotevilla. He has visions of people coming from all over the world to start camping and living all around the mesa for protection and safety. Masao told Hopi that those who stick to the traditions and stay strong will be protected, and that unfortunately does not include all the Hopi. Many are corrupted and becoming very westernized. Even Hopi will soon learn they cannot eat their money. He said, it's the beginning of starvation in the U.S. and North America. It will get very hard. Droughts and the bees disappearing, and there will be fires, and the market will crash. Grandfather Martin then predicted by October 2010, the U.S. economy will be gone because of natural disasters and global corruption. And if it fails, so does Canada's and Mexico. Hopi warns that nothing should be brought back from the moon, and if this were done, The Hopi warned the balance of natural and universal laws and forces would be disturbed, resulting in earthquakes, severe changes in weather patterns, and social unrest. All these things are happening today, though of course not necessarily because of the moon rocks. On August 7th, 1970, a spectacular UFO sighting was witnessed by dozens of people and photographed by Chuck Roberts of Prescott Courier. This occurred after a UFO calling by several Hopi Indians, and was interpreted by some Hopis as being a partial fulfillment of a certain inscribed warning, the coming of the Purification Day, when true Hopi will be flown to other planets in ships without wings. The survivals of the Great Deluge, thousands of years ago, split up into 4 groups that moved in all 4 directions. Only one group completed their journey to the North Pole and back under the guidance of a brilliant star in which the Great Spirit traveled. Upon landing, he drew a petroglyph on Second Mesa showing a maiden riding on a wingless dome-shaped craft. The petroglyph signaled the coming day of purification when the true Hopi will fly to other planets in ships without wings. The Hopi also predicted that when the heart of the Hopi land trust is dug up, great disturbances would develop in the balance of nature. Martin said recently that elders told us that when the plants blossom in the middle of winter, we should need to go to Santa Fe to warn everyone of suffering and destruction unless they change their ways. Last year in the middle of winter, the plants began to blossom. How much suffering and destruction will accompany the time of the purification, and what will be its end result? Martin tells judgment in front of a big mirror and death to all those who are evil and wicked, with only a handful of people surviving in every nation overseas who will then come to this continent, which we call heaven. All the suffering going on in this country with tornadoes, floods, earthquakes is carried on the breath of Mother Earth because she is in pain, said Roberta Blackcoat, an elder of the Independent Dene at Big Mountain. She explains that Four Corners area is particularly sacred because it literally holds Mother's Earth internal organs, coal and uranium, which Bureau of Indian Affairs has allowed Peabody Coal Mine to mine. They are trying to take her precious guts out for money, said Blackcoat. My grandfather told me that coal is like the liver, and uranium is both the heart and lungs of Mother Earth. Hopi and Navajo traditionalists are fighting the mining. These life and death matters will be determined when Pahana returns. The theories abound as to Pahana's identity. Since Pahana has also been called the White Brother, and since he is to return from the East, Hopi of past centuries wondered whether he could be a Spaniard or an Anglo, and devised tests of determining the true Pahana, including knowledge of greeting, of brotherhood, similarities of religious beliefs, and possession of the missing piece of the stone tablet. Many were tested, including Catholics, Baptists, Mormons, but none passed to the satisfaction of the traditional Hopi. The Hopi Prophecy Rock, Hopi Reservation in Arizona, long before Pahana, the white man, ever set foot in the Americas, long before the hegemony of the red race had been challenged by light-skinned people, as the prophecies told us it would, a spot in the immensity of the desert, a center of spiritual power, was Hopi, the land of the peaceful ones. The continent was different then, much space, few to occupy it, but the energy coming from Hopi in its realms where communications are not of this world, in dimensions set by Taoa and expressed by Maso. Hopi was the thread, the bridge, the place of balance and peace. If perhaps there was a name, a word that came to show the world what Hopi peace is, it is balance. The world must grow, expand, but it must do it in balance. Otherwise nature, the great regulator, will take over, as it is now, with floods, eruptions, famine, earthquakes. This is nature at war, nature that will convince humankind of the need for balance, to set in motion positive energies to reestablish a world in balance. In the beginning, we are told, Tawa, the Creator, gave us his life plan, as it is written on the rock of Oribe, which we call the prophecy. If we hold fast to the sacred ways as he's devised for us, what we have gained we will never lose. But still, we have to choose between the two ways. This is the balance of Taoa's way, for he will always meet us halfway. That is why on the sacred petroglyph he is portrayed holding in his hand the thread of the sacred way. In the other hand is the bow, for the bow clan is the one which led us out of the underworld at the beginning of the Hopi way. That is what the arrow shot from the bow means on the rock. The diagram shows 2 lines. The lower line is the path of the Great Spirit, for in its last end, a man bending on the cane the old ones use, pointing to the corn, which is the sacred food. The old one shows he was first and he will be the last. And so will we if we hold fast to his pathway. But next to him, beware of the other way, the way of life of those who do not pray. It is easy enough to see that their heads are not fastened to their body, as it happens with people who use their mind instead of their faith in their spirit way. As Tawa life plan shows, their line ends in a zigzag way, in the void of the mind, of the faithless life and the fruitless. But there is another line on the sacred map drawn on the rock, a vertical line that connects the two ways. It is like a ladder that some might use to change ways, to go from the way of peace and balance, Taiwa's ways, to a path that seems to many a much easier one. Finally seeing that the Hopi way of balance is the only chance, many will choose to climb down the ladder to go through the Great Spirit Gateway. The time of confusion in which many will choose either path is called the time of purification. The prophecy says that the earth will shake 3 times, first the Great War, then the second one, when the swastika rose above the battlefield of Europe, to end in the rising sun sinking in the sea of blood. The end of an empire, or perhaps the beginning of another? Now, what would the third one be? This, the prophecy does not say, for it depends on which path humankind will walk, the greed, the comfort, and the profit, or the path of love, strength, and balance. When strong-hearted people keep on singing the song of creation, they will find the true path forgotten by so many, so Grandpa David says. When prayer and meditation are used rather than relying on new inventions to create more imbalance, they will also find the true path. Mother Nature tells us which is the right path. When earthquakes, floods, hailstorms, drought, and famine will be the life of every day, the time will have then come forth of the return of the true path, or going the zigzag way. Long ago, Masao told us, remember the Pahana, the white brother. He has the other stone tablet, but he has not returned it yet. He will be sent so the people who held fast to the Hopi way can be spared from the destruction. He is the purifier for people to go on with the Great Spirit life plan. It will then open our hearts and minds when a new age is about to be, with people renewed and purified through fire. It will be like the pure gold of a new day, but fire is red, and when it takes command, it will set the forces of nature in motion. We will know when purification day has come. We are all the caretakers of life. Balance of nature depends on us. The world will be what we want it to be. And these are the teachings of San Francisco Peaks in Flagstaff, Arizona. In the beginning, there was endless space in which nothing existed but Tawa, the sun, spirit, who contrived to gather some of the elements of space and inject some of his own substance to create the first world, inhabited largely by insect creatures, which lived in dark caves and fought amongst themselves. Tawa sent a new spirit, Grandmother Spider, down to prepare for a long trip. She led them on a long journey, during which they changed form, grew fur on their bodies, acquired tails, and took shapes of dogs, wolves, and bears. They arrived at the second world, but Tawa was still displeased, for the creatures did not understand the meaning of life any more than their predecessors had. So Grandmother Spider was dispatched again, and while she led them on their second journey, Tawa created a third world, lighter and moist. By the time they arrived in the third world, they had become people. Spider Grandmother cautioned them to renounce evil and live in harmony. They built villages and planted corn, but it was cold. Again, Spider Grandmother arrived. She taught them how to weave and make pots, but the pots could not be baked, and the corn did not grow well because of the chill. One day the hummingbird arrived, explaining that he had been seen by Masao, who lived yet another world above the sky, called the upper world, and he was the owner of fire. The hummingbird taught the people to make fire with a drill and left. They learned to bake the pottery so it wouldn't break. They warmed the fields by lighting fires. They cooked their meals instead of eating it raw. Things were better in the third world now. But soon sorcerers, Pawakas, began to unleash evil in the world, making medicines that would harm people and turn their minds from virtue. Men gambled instead of tending their fields. One account tells of that Grandmother Spider came again to warn them, telling them that they should leave this world and go to the upper world. Another account tells that a wild chief prayed for 4 days and asked that the birds, the mockingbird, the canary, the eagle, the hawk, the swallow, and finally the shrike, who flew up into the opening out the other side where it was better, brighter world, and a shrike returned with the news. Some say that the boy who reminded them of a chipmunk planted a fir pine, then a long needle pine, and finally a bamboo stalk. Again, the birds flew to the top of the tree, and after finding a way up to the top, told the people that they could climb up the inside of the stalk to reach the fourth world. There was a lot of work to be done to make the fourth world inhabitable, And by one account, it was Grandmother Spider who created the Twin Peaks, San Francisco peaks. These peaks are considered by many to be one of the homes of the sacred Kachinas, the spirit essence of everything in the real world.